Before the crowds, before the lights, before country music crowned its legends, there were love stories unfolding quietly behind the music. Stories shaped by sacrifice, heartbreak, faith, and the simple, stubborn act of choosing someone again and again. Tonight we step behind the curtain into the real human journeys of 7 couples who walked through storms the world never saw and held on to love anyway. It begins with a man the world knew as a rebel, but who, behind closed doors, was fighting a battle most people never survive. Johnny Cash was rising fast, his voice cutting through radios across America. Yet fame only made his demons louder. Pills rattled in his pockets. Nights disappeared. Days blurred into each other. And the people who loved him watched helplessly as the darkness closed in. Except June Carter. June didn't save him with speeches or dramatic ultimatums. Her love came through in small, steady acts, the kind that don't make headlines but change lives. She was the one knocking gently on the bathroom door at 3 in the morning, sitting on the hallway floor, her back against the wall, waiting for the shaking to stop. The one who quietly took a half-empty bottle from his nightstand and poured it down the sink before he woke. The one who looked him in the eye and said, "You're still in there. I know you are." Her belief in him was relentless, and slowly, painfully, Johnny began to believe too. Redemption wasn't sudden. It was messy, fragile, but June stood beside him until he could stand again. Their story is a reminder that sometimes love doesn't arrive as fireworks, but as a lifeline. But if Johnny and June taught us about redemption, the next couple teaches us about timing. Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood felt their connection the first time they sang together. It was easy, warm, almost startling in its rightness. But life had already placed them on separate tracks. They were married to other people, rooted in commitments they took seriously. So they kept their distance, even when the harmonies felt like home. Backstage after shows, Garth would sometimes linger alone in the quiet dressing room, the smell of guitar polish still in the air, thinking about the way Trisha's voice wrapped around his. He never acted on it. She never pushed. They chose honor over impulse. Years passed, careers exploded, their personal lives shifted, unraveled, rearranged. And one day when the dust had settled, they crossed paths again, older, freer, and finally arriving at the same moment. What once would have broken something now completed something. Their story shows that sometimes love isn't a spark. Sometimes it's a door that opens only when both hearts are finally ready to walk through it. But while Garth and Trisha waited years for their moment, the next couple had to learn how to protect theirs in the harshest spotlight country music had ever seen. Tim McGraw and Faith Hill didn't fall quietly. Their chemistry hit like lightning, the kind that makes crowds scream and tabloids salivate. But behind the performances, the matching smiles, the glamorous tours, their marriage was fighting for air. There were nights when hotel walls held their arguments, the sound of Faith closing a drawer firmly after Tim stumbled in too late. Nights when Tim sat alone at the kitchen table, long after the girls were asleep, staring at a glass he didn't want but didn't know how to put down. One night, Faith placed her hands flat on that same kitchen counter and told him, softly but firmly, "I need you here. We need you here." And something inside him shifted. He began pouring drinks down the sink instead of into himself, started showing up earlier, leaving the stage adrenaline behind instead of carrying it home. He focused on being present, being steady, being hers. Their love wasn't the fairy tale the world imagined. It was a commitment, one rebuilt over and over through honesty and hard choices. But if Tim and Faith rebuilt themselves through effort, Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani rebuilt themselves through healing. When they met, both were shattered. Blake had just walked through a public divorce. Gwen was grieving one of the most painful betrayals of her life. Fame doesn't protect you from heartbreak, it just broadcasts it. One afternoon during a break on The Voice, Blake sat in an empty rehearsal room, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Gwen stepped in quietly, and instead of talking, she just sat beside him. He finally whispered, "I don't know how to get through this." She said, "I don't either." Two people from opposite worlds, connected by the same wound. There was a moment, a small one, when Gwen laughed unexpectedly at a joke Blake made. She later said it scared her a little, because she hadn't heard her own laughter in months. Blake noticed, and he kept making her laugh, gently, like someone coaxing sunlight back into a room. Their love didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived like breath returning after being held for too long. But if Blake and Gwen found healing, the next couple faced heartbreak that could have broken any family. Luke Bryan and Caroline Boyer had already walked through young love, breakups, reunions, and a chaotic start to adulthood. But nothing prepared them for the phone call that changed their lives. Luke's sister, gone, without warning. Years later, another call. His brother-in-law, gone too. Suddenly, 3 children were without parents. Luke and Caroline didn't hesitate. They opened their home, rearranged their lives, and stepped into a responsibility bigger than anything they ever expected. Caroline took her nephew's trembling hand as he walked into his new bedroom, a room she had prepared with soft blankets and a nightlight, knowing he'd need comfort more than anything. There were nights when Caroline sat alone on the porch, the cool air brushing against her face as she cried quietly, grieving, exhausted, determined. Nights when Luke squeezed her hand, trying to be strong, even as his own heart felt splintered. Their love grew deeper, not because life was kind, but because life was cruel, and they faced it together. But while Luke and Caroline grew through tragedy, Kane Brown and Caitlin Brown grew through transformation. Kane never had the steady foundation most people take for granted. He grew up bouncing between homes, schools, uncertainty, always feeling like he was one wrong step from losing everything. When his career skyrocketed, it only magnified the emptiness he carried. Then came Caitlin. She didn't fall for Kane Brown, the star. She fell for the young man sitting in a dim backstage hallway, hoodie up, tapping his foot anxiously before a show. She placed a hand on his shoulder once, just a simple touch, and he later said it was the first time he'd felt grounded in months. One night on tour, after the crowd roared for him, Kane went back to his bus, sat in the dark, and played one of Caitlin's early voice memos on repeat, her soft harmonies filling the tiny room. It calmed him, centered him, reminded him who he wanted to be. Their duet, Thank God, wasn't a performance. It was a confession. 2 lives becoming one steady rhythm. But if Kane and Caitlin found stability, the final couple found strength through faith. Carrie Underwood and Mike Fisher lived in 2 different worlds. She under blinding stage lights, he on cold ice rinks where breath turns to steam in the air. But their hearts aligned quickly, quietly, deeply. And then came the heartbreaks no one saw. Miscarriage after miscarriage, hope rising and collapsing in the same breath. Carrie performed on stage with mascara perfect and smile practiced, but inside she was praying the kind of prayers that come from empty, breaking places. There was a night she sat on the edge of the bed, ultrasound photo in her hands, tears falling onto the blanket. Mike knelt beside her, hands wrapped around hers, whispering a prayer she didn't have the strength to say herself. They walked through the shadows together, and when their miracle child arrived, it felt like the world exhaled with them. 7 couples, 7 journeys, 7 truths about love, not shaped by perfection, but by perseverance. Johnny and June showed that love can be a lifeline. Garth and Trisha showed that timing shapes destiny. Tim and Faith showed that commitment is a daily choice. Blake and Gwen showed that healing is a kind of love too. Luke and Caroline showed that family is built through sacrifice. Kane and Caitlin showed that stability can transform a life. Carrie and Mike showed that faith holds us through the storms. If one of these stories touched your heart tonight, I'd love to know which one stayed with you. Your reflections mean more than you know. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're always welcome to join us here on the channel. Because in the end, These stories remind us of something timeless, that the people under the brightest lights often walk through the darkest nights, that love is not effortless, it is chosen, again and again, and that behind every great song, there is a heartbeat strong enough to survive the storm. These are the real love stories of country music, stories that stay with us long after the last note fades.